The White Witch of Rose Hall murdered 3 husbands, tortured her slaves, and practices voodoo from beyond the grave. That is the story tourists pay $35 to hear on the night tour. The Jamaica Archives checked. There is no evidence Annie Palmer killed anyone. The name White Witch was invented by a novelist in 1929. The grave they show you is a prop. You are not visiting a haunted house. You are paying to be lied to. Rose Hall Great House still stands in Montego Bay. The tour still runs. Geoffrey S. Yates, former assistant archivist at the Jamaica Archives, examined the Parish records and the plantation documents. The real Annie Mary Paterson married John Rose Palmer in 1820. He died in debt. She died in 1846, 12 years after slavery ended, buried by a reverend in relative obscurity. Not murdered by slaves, not a witch, just a woman who died poor. The legend was manufactured twice. First by journalist John Costello in 1868, who published a pamphlet confusing 2 different women. Then by novelist H.G. DeLisser in 1929, who wrote a fiction novel nearly a century after abolition and needed a title that would sell. He made one up. The woman buried there was not Annie Palmer. The grave marker was added later for the tour. I read DeLisser's novel before I read the archives. The fiction is more vivid. That is the problem. What did they tell you at Rose Hall? What version did you hear? If you paid for that tour, you paid to be deceived. That is the first legend, a fabrication sold as history. On the 7th of April, 1760, Easter Monday, a Fante royal named Tacky led 400 enslaved Coromantee people off the plantations of St. Mary Parish. Tacky had been a chief in what is now Ghana before he was captured near Elmina and sold into slavery. On Jamaica, he became something else. The rebellion was organized by Obeah practitioners who moved between plantations, blessing warriors with powder they claimed would make them immune to British bullets. At Ballard's Valley, an Obeahman spread the powder over the rebels' bodies and proclaimed that he himself could not be killed. The British soldiers learned of the claim. They captured the Obeahman, killed him, and hung his body with his mask and decorations where the rebels could see it. Many returned to the plantations after that. The belief died with the body. What followed the rebellion was worse than the rebellion itself. 2 leaders were hanged in iron cages on Kingston Parade and left to die of thirst over 4 to 8 days under the sun. 2 others were burned alive. More than 500 rebels were executed or transported to Honduras. And on the 18th of December, 1760, Jamaica passed the first law in the British Empire to criminalize Obeah. The punishment was death. That law did not die with slavery. The Obeah Act of 1898 remains on the books in Jamaica today. Flogging as a punishment was removed only in November of 2012. The last conviction was in 1964, a woman named Cindy Brooks. The last arrest was in 1977. A religion brought from Africa, the same religion that gave rebels the courage to fight, remains technically illegal 264 years after the law was written. This is the history Jamaican children are not taught in school. They learn the legend instead. And the face on the Jamaican $500 bill is a woman the colonial records called an Obeah woman. Nanny of the Maroons was born into an Akon community in present-day Ghana around 1680. She led the Windward Maroons during the First Maroon War, and the British could not defeat her. The legend says she could catch bullets and redirect them back at the soldiers who fired. The legend says her kettle boiled without fire, and British soldiers who approached it fell into gorges. Historians suggest she may have used sedating herbs. The colonizers called it witchcraft because they could not call it tactics. In the Journal of the Assembly of Jamaica, March of 1733, a man named William Cuffey was paid a reward for killing Nanny, the rebels' old Obeah woman. The colonizers had a word for her, witch. A criminal under the law they wrote to suppress rebellions like hers. And on the 20th of April, 1740, the British Empire signed a peace treaty with the Maroons, granting 500 acres of land to Nanny and her followers. The empire sued for peace with a woman they would have classified as property. On the 31st of March, 1982, Jamaica granted Nanny the Order of National Hero. She is the only woman to hold the title. Her face is on the currency, and the religion she practiced is still technically a crime. The Assembly Journal entry is real. You can look it up. Not every legend in Jamaica is about the powerful. Some are about the people who ran. Three-Fingered Jack was real. His name appears in the Jamaican Royal Gazette in 1780 in a proclamation offering a reward for his capture. He was an escaped slave who led approximately 60 runaways in the Blue Mountains of St. Thomas in the east for nearly 2 years. The House of Assembly voted a bounty of £1,000 for his head. That was a fortune in 1780. They were terrified of one man. He was killed in 1781 by Maroons. The same Maroons who had signed peace treaties with the British and agreed to return runaways for bounty. The chains of the peace treaty bound them to hunt runaways. The party that killed him was led by a white superintendent named Bernard Nalty. The Maroons who accompanied him were recorded by name: John Reeder, Samuel Grant, Little Quacko. A slave named Quashie was christened James Reeder and earned his freedom by bringing back Jack's head in his three-fingered hand. His fingers had been cut off in an earlier fight. Some accounts say by another enslaved man trying to capture him for the reward. The legend erases this. Freedom fighters became bounty hunters. The Maroons traded other people's freedom for their own security. An enslaved man traded another enslaved man's head for his own liberty. The system made them choose. Some will say the Maroons had no choice. I say a choice made under pressure is still a choice. They chose their own security over solidarity, and the British turned the story into entertainment. Dr. Benjamin Moseley wrote about Jack in his 1799 treatise on sugar, describing him as a bandit protected by Obeah magic. In 1800, the Haymarket Theatre in London staged a pantomime called Obeah, or Three-Fingered Jack. The rebel who terrified Jamaica became a villain for British audiences to enjoy. Some legends attach themselves to geography. The River Muma lives in the rivers of Jamaica. During slavery, she required blood. In his 1894 book, Jamaica Superstitions, Thomas Banbury recorded that enslaved people on sugar plantations persuaded their overseers to sacrifice an ox at the fountainhead of rivers during drought. Bullocks were killed yearly on some estates to bring rain. The colonizers agreed because the mills needed water. She guards a golden table the Spanish threw into the Rio Cobre when they fled. Those who try to steal it are pulled under and drowned. Flat Bridge crosses the Rio Cobre in St. Catherine Parish. It was built in the 1700s with slave labor. 19,000 vehicles cross it every day. There are no guardrails. The river is below. On the 16th of July, 2016, 6 members of a church group drowned when their vehicle went over the edge. Bishop Stephen Ricketts and his 2 sons, Shivani and Sujay, were among the dead. In April of 2025, Noel Lloyd Patterson, 65 years old, lost control of his Toyota Hiace. The bridge that locals say is haunted by the spirits of slaves who died building it continues to kill people. The guardrails never came. The deaths never stopped. On the lonely roads of Jamaica at night, something drags chains. Walk a back road after dark. Listen. The rolling calf is a fiery-eyed bull that appears without warning. The folklore says it is the restless spirit of a particularly wicked person, most commonly a cruel butcher or a brutal plantation overseer, condemned to walk the roads forever, dragging the chains of his sins. The chains are not metaphor. They are the chains of slavery transformed. One interpretation holds that the rolling calf represents a runaway slave, still dragging the chains attached to his body. Another holds that the overseer now wears the chains he once used on others. Either way, the sound the legend describes is the sound of slavery. Enslaved people who could not punish their tormentors in life created an afterlife where the punishment never ends. That is what these legends are: coded history, compressed trauma. The colonizers wrote laws to suppress the religion that gave people courage. The archives prove the most famous haunted house is a commercial lie. The national hero was called a witch by the men who lost to her. The freedom fighter was hunted by people who should have been his allies. The bridge built on slave graves still takes lives. And the monster dragging chains down the road is wearing them because he once put them on someone else. Jamaica still has an Obeah law. The woman who practiced it is on the currency. The white witch never existed. The legends are still being sold. The Jamaica Archives are open to the public. Moortown still stands and still keeps the Maroon tradition alive. Geoffrey Yates published his research. If you want the real history, it exists. You will not find it on the $35 tour. If your grandmother told you a different version, that is probably closer to the truth. If your family is from Moortown or St. Mary Parish, we want to hear what was passed down. If you have worked as a guide at Rose Hall, we want to hear what you were told to say. The next time you hear a Jamaican ghost story, ask who told it first, and ask what they were trying to hide. Tell me in the comments which legend you want next. There are more. Some of them are worse than these.